My name is Amanda Rosa, and this is my presentation on Colombia. Colombia is located in the northwest corner of South America. It is bordered by Panama, Venezuela, Brazil, Peru, and Ecuador. National Geographic calls Colombia a land of extremes. Its landscape varies from northern deserts, the Andes mountain range, tropical beaches, and the immense Amazon basin to the south. Colombia has a population of 47,698,524 people, and its official language is Spanish. It is the second largest population of Spanish speakers in the world and the fifth largest country in Latin America. Colombia has a population which is 53.5% mestizo and about 38% white. The rest of the population is about 10.4% black and only 3.4% Native American. Colombia has the second largest African descendant population in South America, only behind Brazil. It is also the fourth largest black population in the Western Hemisphere. Like many Latin American countries, Colombia is majority Catholic. Colombia is named after Christopher Columbus, which is ironic considering that Columbus did not discover Colombia and never even went there. But then again, Columbus never technically discovered anything. Like many Latin American countries, Colombia's rich history is both a source of pride and a source of contention. The effects of colonialism, slavery, latifundio practices, and violence are still seen to this very day. The legacies of Colombia's history affect its people and their daily lives. The second part of my presentation will discuss independence, and it's one of the more fascinating and somewhat ridiculous parts of Colombian history that I've studied. Colombia began its nation-building process with, of course, a conspiracy. Tensions in Bogotá continued to rise because of the French invasion of Spain back in 1808. The political rivalry between criollos, which are white Europeans who were born in Colombia, and peninsulares, who were white Europeans born in Spain, rose to the point of contention over who would hold political power. Technically, Colombia was not liberated until August 7th, 1819, during the Battle of Boyacá. Simón Bolívar liberated the Viceroyalty of New Granada, which included modern-day Colombia, Ecuador, Panama, and Venezuela after winning that battle. However, Colombia celebrates its Independence Day on July 20th, 1810, which was 9 years before the Battle of Boyacá. In 1810, criollos devised a two-part conspiracy to organize a mass protest and take control of the government. On the morning of July 20th, Joaquín Camacho went to Viceroy Antonio José Amar y Borbón's home to petition for an open council, which he knew would be denied. Meanwhile, another criollo, Luis Rubio, approached Joaquín González Llorente, a peninsular merchant who was notorious for having a short fuse. Rubio approached Llorente about borrowing a flower vase to use at a dinner in order to honor a criollo sympathizing commissioner. But what happened next is actually unclear to historians. Legend has it that Llorente was explicitly rude, punched someone, and even broke his own vase in anger because he was outraged that a criollo would ask for his vase. Regardless of how Llorente actually reacted, word spread through Bogotá about how the peninsulares treated the criollos, and a riot in the streets ensued. In fact, the riot was so brutal that a crowd chased Llorente down the street, and officers had to keep Llorente in the local jail in order to just keep him safe. The story of the flower vase served as a catalyst for Colombian independence in the years leading up to 1819. Also, side note, the vase was actually hideous, and I don't even know why they would want to borrow it. Although white criollos considered themselves free from Spanish persecution, a significant percentage of Colombia's population remained enslaved for decades. Part 3 of my presentation discusses race in Colombia. As previously stated, Colombia has the second largest black population in South America, and this is, of course, due to its history of slavery, which began in the 1500s. The Spanish brought 1.1 million slaves to the port of Cartagena until slavery was abolished on January 1st, 1852. In parts of Colombia, slaves and free blacks greatly outnumbered whites, and slaves were actually able to testify in courts against white masters. The Department of Chocó became notorious for using enslaved Africans in its gold mines. In 1724, Chocó's population was only 2% white, 37% indigenous, 22% free blacks, and 39% slaves. To this day, Chocó is predominantly black, and Afro-Colombians make up 90% of its 1.3 million population. Afro-Colombians living in Chocó have lived with what some historians call the afterlife of slavery, which maintains almost unprecedented levels of poverty and inequity. In 2016, preventable diseases largely due to a lack of clean water claimed the lives of 51 indigenous children in a province of Chocó. The Colombian government abandoned the department's basic needs, including potable water, healthcare, and infrastructure. A lack of proper roads leave villages and towns virtually isolated from the rest of the department. As of mid-2017, there were no roads that connected the province to major cities like Medellin. The people of Chocó have a long history of complete civil strikes, which closed down businesses and schools since slavery was still practiced. In fact, Afro-Colombian women are especially known for historic acts of protest to protect their children and people. There are two main stories that I will continue to talk about in my actual presentation. One of them is about an Afro-Colombian woman who testified in court to free her son who was supposed to have been freed by her master, and another was of a woman who protested in the streets to avenge the death of her son, who was beaten to death by his master. In 2016, Chocoanos held a strike for 8 days to finally negotiate a 720 million pesos investment from the government in order to build roads and infrastructures. However, the people of Chocó had not seen that money, which led to another strike in May of 2017. Part 4 of my presentation will talk about political violence and drug trafficking, which is probably the most prevalent issue that still harbors so much contention in Colombia to this day, including the people who immigrate to places like the United States. First, I would talk about La Violencia, which is a decade-long period of course, violence between the conservatives and liberals, which led to the deaths and displacement of over 200,000 people. From La Violencia came FARC, which is a rebel Marxist group that still exists to this day. They are responsible and mainly known for being involved in taxing drug traffickers and in orchestrating kidnappings in order to provide funds for themselves. From that leads to Plan Colombia, which was a plan that was devised between the U.S. government and the Colombian government in order, initially, supposedly, to curb drug trafficking and begin the so-called war on drugs. However, the main goal of Plan Colombia ended up being to disperse FARC as much as possible. The effects of Plan Colombia are a bit mixed, although Plan Colombia did do a significant job in lessening the power and influence of FARC. Drug trafficking still exists to this day, and Colombia is still one of the most prevalent places where cocaine is produced and trafficked. And lastly, for this section, I'll talk about, of course, Pablo Escobar. What's interesting about Pablo Escobar is not just his unbelievable cruelty and the unfathomable amount of wealth that he garnered, but also this very strange and interesting morbid curiosity that many non-Colombians have towards him, especially with the Netflix series Narcos and many documentaries and TV shows that are modeled after his life. and how that affects Colombia today, and how it affects how Colombians see themselves and how they deal with how other people see them. Part 5 is a reflection on what I've learned. As a half Colombian who lives in the United States, I've learned mainly anecdotal stories of the history of Colombia and why my grandparents left Colombia and how they experienced La Violencia. But it was interesting to see how La Violencia and other parts of Colombian history played out in terms of how historians view it. And lastly, I will end with what the future of Colombia holds, not just economically, but how the people of Colombia are still recovering after not just La Violencia and not just FARC, but just after a history of violence. And that is hopefully what my presentation will be. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching.